Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic episode for you guys today. So we're going to jump right into the questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cod Elite option at Highly Respected Substack. And for less than $16 a month, you can get this power, and that's at highly-respected.com. And if you don't want to ask any questions, but you would like to listen to the paywall content of our IQ supplements and mailbags posted every week, you can sign up for the normal subscription there. So we're going to jump right into it with Nitro today. Nitro leading us off with two questions. He said his first question is, he thanked me for the great, no. I misspoke. He was just thanking me for the great answers last week. There was someone else who thanked me also for my great IQ supplement last week that you guys should listen to on the George Floyd Revolution 5 years later. So his first question today is, do you think that the Trump admin is waiting to turn hard against the courts until after the budget bill has finally made it through Congress to minimize political blowback? I saw someone make the point that even Andrew Jackson never really directed or directly defied the courts, as the famous "let him enforce it" ruling was against the state of Georgia, not the federal government. The admin has been pretty good at working around loopholes and ridiculous rulings so far, but is it sustainable longer term? So I actually talked about this with some lawyers, or sort of this question with lawyers last weekend, and they think this is one of the major problems for the judiciary going forward, is that a president can just say, you're not going to enforce this. What are you going to do? And tell me not to do this? Right now, most of the presidents just choose to maneuver around it or to cut corners. Even with what Trump is doing, they deport the migrants right before the judge issues his ruling. They find shortcuts and try to cut around it rather than directly defying the courts. And even Biden was doing that in the last term. Everybody like, oh, well, you say I can't do student loan debt forgiveness, but maybe I can. And then they just figure out workarounds. They don't really directly defy the courts, but a president could easily just do so because, as apparent in Andrew Jackson's statement, they don't have the power to enforce it. What army do they control to say you can't do this? And this is also a direct result of the legislative branch being completely impotent. They can't do anything. In the past, you would just hope the legislative branch reins in the president. They would impeach him or turn against him or refuse to pass any funding. But Congress cannot get anything done. And they cannot unite against a president. And the Republican Party is going to be fanatically loyal to a Republican president, and the Democratic Party is going to be fanatically loyal to a Democratic president. And they will, especially with Democrats, they will encourage him to defy the courts and to make his own judgments and his own orders, regardless of whatever the courts say. So you can't depend on Congress to act as a check on the presidency, and the courts don't have the real physical power to enforce these rulings. So a president could theoretically decide to say ignore them. But I don't know. I don't think Trump is ever going to directly defy or go to war against the courts. One thing I think one thing is that the right is a little bit too addicted to hysteria and constant demoralization and just like, oh, it's all over. Whenever a court has a minor ruling about a minor immigration thing, the entire right-wing Twitter melts down and is like, we need to abolish the judiciary. And maybe that would be better. I don't know. That's not going to happen. But people are always like, this is the most insane thing ever. But when we let these things work out the process, generally the courts rule in Trump's favor. It's generally been the policy for most of his immigration policies. The only thing I think that's probably the courts are not going to uphold is his birthright citizenship order. I think all the immigration enforcement mechanisms that he's trying to push are going to go through. The courts upheld his transgender ban in the military. So a lot of guys, it's like anytime a court says something, it's like, well, it's time to ban the judiciary. But the judiciary is, especially compared to, say, what they were doing under Nixon and Reagan, are much more amenable to our side. Now, there is a degree of frustration with this because there are some Trump appointees or past Republican appointees on the lower courts who are ruling against Trump. And also he has ACB and, well, I mean, everyone knows John Roberts is a moderate, but he appointed ACB and they're all like, this is the strongest conservative you'll ever have in the court. And she is only slightly better than John Roberts, and she's certainly worse than Kavanaugh, Roberts, Alito, and Thomas. And he's frustrated with the Federalist Society giving him not so great of picks, which I think it was funny for him to attack Leonard Leo and some of the Federalist Society and to knock them down a peg. I still think the Federalist Society is a huge benefit for us, and we should acknowledge its merit. Without the Federalist Society, we would still be picking people like David Souter and just random friends of Republican senators who are like, oh yeah, this judge is really conservative, and he turns out to be a libtard. They were horrible at picking judges before the Federalist Society. Horrible. Even though Scalia was post Federalist Society, but it hadn't fully established itself, and that's even the same with Clarence Thomas. But Rehnquist was picked before the Federalist Society was established, when he's one of the best Supreme Court justices of the modern era, if not the best. So without the Federalist Society, we'd still be picking these, blank slates. We don't know what they're going to be like. With the Federalist Society, we at least get an idea that they are dispositionally conservative and can be trusted on a number of issues. But there are certain issues that we're not sure they can be trusted on because the Federalist Society has not been active in making immigration a litmus test, which they should change that going forward, and they should not be recommending judges who are terrible on the issue and recommending them to continue to elevate within the judiciary. But that aside, I don't think Trump will directly defy them. He doesn't have quite the level of political support to do a direct defiance of the Supreme Court. One thing is, I always think with a lot of the right is that they imagine that you don't need any type of political capital to do things. You can just be a dictator with no one supporting you. That's not really the case. You do need allies and people encouraging you to do this and to stick by you, and to also propagandize the public to say this is the right move. A lot of Republicans would feel very queasy about this. Even his party, even though I said the party would be fanatically loyal to him, the Republican Party would get cold feet about this. They wouldn't quite want to go along with it. And even a lot of conservative media, or particularly Fox News, would be a little skittish about this if he directly defied the courts, because it would essentially establish a quasi-dictatorship, which I think some people on our side would think is awesome. But even people don't want to go forward on that step. And we don't really have quite the crisis to justify it. Now, if we had the circumstances that FDR and Lincoln were able to establish themselves as quasi-dictators with the Great Depression, World War II, and then the Civil War, you can get away with that. But Trump, we don't really have that crisis anymore. So it wouldn't really work. Really, they're just going to try to skirt around it and move around it. The one thing, and I think the courts, with exception of birthright citizenship, are going to rule in his favor. And with birthright citizenship, he can't really deny the courts because he can say, oh, yeah, I'm stripping you of citizenship. But then they're going to apply the courts, and the courts are going to uphold it. And it's just going to be a mess that they don't want to do. It's more of like how they enforce the laws, which they're already defying the courts to an extent. I mean, they are deporting people and not returning them after courts have told them to return them. They did return one migrant, but they haven't returned who was. I forget this story, but they did return one, but they have not returned Kilmar and a bunch of others that they've been ordered to return. And so they are defying the courts already. But I think they can just say, well, we're not really defying the courts. It's going to be more working around the courts than defying them. I worry though that if a Democrat got in there and if a Democratic authoritarian was in office and the court just said you can't do this, and it's also more likely because we're going to have a conservative makeup at the Supreme Court for a long time, and when a Democrat's in office, they're going to constantly rule against him, and that Democrat will then choose to want to just go his own way and just try to enforce things. And the legislative branch is not going to do anything. It can't do anything. And that he will be able to enforce his will to a degree that I think it'd be tougher for a Republican. I mean, he'd have the whole entire mainstream media on his side. Democrats would have to be for it. They don't really care as much about, well, I don't want to say they care as much about norms, but they can delude themselves into thinking there's a moral obligation to do this, rather than with Republicans who are very still skittish about mainstream media attacks and other things. So, yeah, but to go against the courts after the big beautiful bill, no, it's going to still be him like posting on Truth Social, them trying to work around the courts. I would say this, like for people who get blackpilled about this, the two things I want to say is one, the Trump administration, unlike the first time, when the first term of courts would say something, they would just not do anything. They were like, oh, sorry, our hands are tied. Second term, they try to figure out ways to get around it, and they are getting around it. And I don't say it's directly defying the courts, but they are indirectly defying the courts. And that is a serious improvement. And they're always going to try to figure out ways to get around these court orders. So that's one white pill. Second one is, for most of these immigration enforcement mechanisms that Trump is trying to do, the courts are going to ultimately rule in his favor. And I think it's fine to criticize libtard judges. I don't care. It's like, oh, this is against our norms. I don't give a shit. I think they deserve criticism. But like Boasberg and these guys. I mean, Boasberg and other people think that they are the real dictators of America. Even the courts think that they can determine trade policy. Eventually, they're going to decide that they can determine foreign policy, and they're not even supposed to be determining immigration policy. It's supposed to be left to the legislative branch, but the legislative branch can't be trusted to do anything. So now the courts determine immigration policy. But I think over time, the courts are going to rule in Trump's favor, and Trump is going to be able to do what he wants to do on immigration for the most part. And the courts are ruling in favor of his rest of his agenda. The DEI, the anti-affirmative action stuff, transgender bans, and other things. The courts are easily upholding. So I'm not as black-pilled about it as about the courts are just overturning Trump's agenda. I think it's going to work out for the most part in the end. And I don't think he doesn't really have, I don't think, the sufficient level of capital to wage a type of war against the judiciary that FDR was trying to wage in the late 30s. And even FDR's effort didn't work. He wanted to pack the court, and a lot of members of his own party turned against that. So I'm not as demoralized about this fight. I think it'll work out in the end for Trump. Second question. What did you think of Elon's departure? Is this a sign of an actual rift between him and Trump, or is he just moving on to other pursuits? Ken also asked similar two questions. In his two questions, he says, did Elon actually cuck Stephen Miller? Can you please give us a Doge post-mortem? So this is all Elon questions. And, well, he clearly was not being able to get done what he wanted to do. And there had been a meeting, I think it was in March or April, where he got chewed out and saying, like, you've got to know your boundaries and other things. And I think Elon thought that he could run the government like a business and he could just do whatever he wants, which this always happens with businessmen when they get in the government. They think like, oh, well, this is something inefficient and bad. I'm just going to stop doing it or cut it. That's not how government works. And I think Elon, after spending a few months in government, decided that this sucks. And also his business interests are threatened by what he's doing in the government. So he's moved on. And the real funny thing about Elon is he's turned against the big, beautiful bill. He's like, it's not cutting enough spending. But at the same time, it's cutting energy subsidies. And it's like, oh, well, this is bad policy. And it's like, well, those energy tax breaks, it's like if they were left in, there's going to be even more of a deficit. So all these people are like, we need to cut more, but nothing that harms my interests. This is why nothing gets cut, is because everyone has their own little petty interests that they want to preserve and protect. And they want their petty interests preserved and then everything else cut. The problem is everyone else in America has their own little particular petty interest and they all have the same mindset. And then, they're going to, depending on what they decide to cut, you're going to have a unified coalition of people turning against it who also all want to cut spending. But they all want to cut spending for other interest groups, not for their own. And this is one of the issues with modern American democracy, which Elon is a full participant in. Now, I would say in Elon's defense, unlike some of the other people, businessmen who are getting involved in the Trump administration where it's all personal interest, Elon was motivated by the cause of solving, government incompetency and bloat on his own. And it did harm his own business interests. It wasn't so much that he was doing this for his own interest, which I was surprised by. I thought DOGE would be pretty much obsessed with getting more DOD contracts for Elon's businesses. But that actually did not turn out to be the case. He, even though they weren't cutting anything from the Defense Department or anything that particularly affected Elon, it was still harming his business interests. And it was just these concerns that he got really obsessed with. But he gave up. He got blackpilled. And I think he was creating too many enemies within the Trump administration. There was all these reports that any meeting he would go in, and I've talked about this before, is Elon is an incredibly unfunny person, but he thinks he's hilarious. And his goal in life is to be seen as Caecius Maximus, as a really funny guy. But he is not a funny guy. And in all these sources from these meetings, they would say he'd spent his whole time telling shitty jokes that no one would laugh at. And this annoyed everyone. And it probably got on Trump's nerves as well. I mean, Trump realizes he's a valuable ally, but he also knows that he was getting in the way of an effective administration. So I don't think it's an actual rift. I mean, he's hiring, Katie Miller, Stephen Miller's wife, pay her a lot. This is a sign that he's still involved in MAGA world, but I think he just wants to focus completely on his businesses and other things. And he is like autistic. You have to remember he is autistic. He's giving interviews where he doesn't want to give his thoughts on politics anymore. He just wants to focus purely on his businesses. Whether he'll get back into politics again for 2028, we'll have to see. I think he will, because the thing is Democrats ever take power again, their number one target is Elon. And he'll probably realize, he may just be in the wilderness and doing his own thing for the next 2 or 3 years. And then he'll realize that Democrats want him to pay a hefty price for this. Or if they regain the House, they're going to be doing a bunch of investigations into him and his businesses. And he's eventually going to say, shit, I'm going to have to support Republicans again in order to preserve my own interests. So I don't think it's going to develop into an actual rift. I mean, he is autistic. Maybe he just becomes so obsessed with a certain thing that he just goes off the deep end. I do think the one thing that is like a sign of him going off the deep end is he shared a what if alt history video on Twitter, which if you guys remember my debate with Roger Lynch, on Timcast, he was saying, we're going to have a civil war. At least 1,000 people are going to be dead by April. Didn't go well. That guy went off the deep end, and began saying he was a reincarnation of Odin, and going on these rants, but apparently he's winning over Elon. So he might go. He might be get a little bit crazier. So we'll have to see what he does outside of the White House. But I don't think he's cucking Stephen Miller. I mean, a lot of these guys are hoping their wives and spouses and relatives get these high-paying jobs, and they're all are doing so. I think it's more of just a sign that Elon is not outside of MAGA world. He's still within it. He's just not in the co-pilot seat anymore. It's Trump's fully in charge. I always predicted this, that eventually Elon's momentum was going to run out and Trump would reassert control. I think Trump did like keeping him around and everyone blaming Elon because that deflected blame from him. But we'll see what happens. Now with DOGE postmortem, DOGE is not technically over, or it's not apparently over. We'll have to see what DOGE does in the future. We'll do a more effective postmortem if there's like an official end to it. So it still might be on to work. They're still trying to get all this data with illegal immigrants. I know the guys involved in are still in the admin and still working hard. So I don't think it's over. I think is that to go with Elon's departure is that Elon thought that DOGE would completely rein in spending and have all these massive cuts. And they even were declaring they're going to cut all this money. I even remember when people were defending the initial round of tariffs, the Liberation Day tariffs, that, they're like, well, the DOGE is cutting so much money for government spending is that we're actually going to have this massive surplus, but they were not cutting this much spending. But most of what they did was good. I think is that they maybe went about it a little ineffectively, but when you're going in there, there's no precedent for this. You're going to shake up things. You're going to break a lot of things. You just got to go in there and do what you need to do. But I think with sometimes that it seemed a bit willy-nilly about what they were doing, and they didn't have maybe the fully written out plan, but they did get things done. I mean, they did, kneecap USAID. That's good. They did cut a lot of these DEI programs. That's good. They have been working and fighting tooth and nail to get information on illegal aliens. That's good. Most of their focuses were pretty good. I think that they did get, in their desperation to find anything they can cut without Congress getting involved, they did cut some stupid stuff. Like I think it was a Social Security. They cut like the helpline or something. And it's like, those old people are still using phones. They're absolutely going to call the helpline, and they probably need that. But most importantly, I think DOGE is good. Hopefully they continue to do stuff because we still need them and the help to deport more illegal aliens. So I don't want to give a full postmortem on it yet. It's not dead yet. So it's still alive. We'll see how it operates post Elon. But, if it goes away to the dodo bird without Elon in the White House, then we'll have a more thorough postmortem of it. So I don't think we should give up on it just yet. Let's see who else we've got. We'll go with Arm Day Enjoyer. He says, if you can improve the big, beautiful bill, particularly on immigration, what would you do? Can be something that can be realistically happen or unlikely to happen. I think this is probably the only bill that can realistically happen. I mean, I'd probably want some more cuts, but they really are having the narrowest of balance. They're walking across a tightrope, and any little shift, is going to see them topple. And I think any type of major change is just not going to be there. I think particularly on immigration. Also, the fact is that this has to be a purely budget bill to get the Senate parliamentarians' approval. The Senate parliamentarian might not approve it. I think she is going to do so. This is less of a ridiculous bill of what they're asking to do than what the Democrats were trying to do. I think this is 2021 or 2022, where they tried to pass an amnesty through a budget bill, which has absolutely nothing to do with the budget. But the Democrats are like, oh, this will save us money. It's clearly had nothing to do with the budget. The Senate parliamentarian, in order to approve a reconciliation bill, which means it would be immune to filibusters and could just pass Congress with a simple majority or pass the Senate with a simple majority, it has to be directly tied to the budgetary concerns. And I think if they add any other things, that's gonna upend that. So I don't really think there's anything with improve the big beautiful bill. My personal preference is that they just separate it into two bills, but or they were maybe less ambitious, is that they just simply, this is immigration and we're permanently setting in stone Trump's tax cuts. That's it. Those two things. That would be my improvement, is actually cutting out stuff from it. But with all these bills, as I was saying in the previous segment, everyone in this country has their own little petty personal interests. And this is especially true of our representatives. And they all want to put their little thing in there. And in order to get it passed, they all have to have their certain pet issue and put in there. Otherwise, a simple bill won't happen. If they had separated it into two bills, maybe that would have been better. But a pared down bill is is what I would do better. Just focus simply on immigration and Trump's tax cuts. But maybe the Senate parliamentary rules against the tax cuts. I don't know why she would rule against the immigration stuff, because that's all pure budget. But we'll see what she rules on. There's a chance they could just defy the Senate parliamentarian. Democrats talked about that in 2021 when they were trying to get their own reconciliation bill through, but it didn't work because Sinema and Manchin, who were still in office at the time, opposed it. So we will discuss that further. His second question: hypothetically, if DeSantis were POTUS right now, how do you think he would do? Based on House Freedom Caucus priorities, I think he would ultimately fail to get anything through and end up like the first Trump admin. A few positive things on immigration, but no major shift in how a GOP admin governs. One, I don't think he could have ever been president, because all of his problems as a national politician were exposed in the primary, and I think he would have lost to Democrats because he's just he has no charisma, and he can't inspire people, and he gets easily flustered by the normal nitty gritty of politics, of meet and greets, giving speeches. He clearly is not very good at this, and also he would have had a tough time winning over those Trump supporters. And Trump was able to lean into his celebrity status to win over these broadcasters, who then got a lot of young people to vote for Trump in a way that wouldn't have happened with DeSantis. DeSantis would have been a disaster on like Theo Vaughn and stuff. He didn't know how to. He doesn't really know how to banter, which is funny because he was a jock. He was a college athlete, but he just doesn't really have that type of charisma. But let's say he did win. I think it would be doing pretty well with executive affairs. I think it would just be a lot more cringe, It wouldn't be as inspiring. He would not be effective in these peace negotiations, like what Trump is doing in the Middle East, which he is really pushing against Israel, and he's trying to work with the Gulf states to make deals and to try to figure out something with Israel, and he's not being a total Israel lackey. DeSantis would have been total Israel pawn there. I don't think he would have even tried to do anything with Ukraine. But outside of that, I don't think, and I think Congress would be more willing to defy him as well, because he doesn't have that personality. And I think if he had tried to get a big beautiful bill through, it would have not made through. The reason why the big beautiful bill passed is because of fear of Trump. They did not fear Trump in the first term. They are positively terrified of Trump in the second term. The only one who's not really terrified of him is, Don Bacon, who's a super moderate. He still has a little bit of fear. And Massey, and it's more that Massey is just, I mean, Massey's probably right, is that, he's had multiple primary attempts against him and he's easily defeated them all. So, and I think Massey just wants to be an independent and he feels he has the ability to do so. So he feels he can defy Trump and not really pay a price for it. And it's probably true. But for every other lawmaker, they feel that if they defy Trump, they're screwed. And this is especially true with the House Freedom Caucus. House Freedom Caucus would not think that about DeSantis. DeSantis does not have the cult of personnel around him, and they could be at loggerheads with him and get a sympathetic hearing from conservative media much more than they can against Trump. So I think the big beautiful bill wouldn't pass, and I don't think he would be having any type of foreign policy results of what Trump is doing. But outside of that, I think most of the executive orders that Trump is pursuing, DeSantis would always try to pursue. I don't think he would have done the birthright citizenship. He would have not done the tariffs. That I know for sure. But there's other things. I don't know if he would have been as willing to defy the courts. So but this is all completely hypothetical and I think the real hypothetical is could he win the presidency? The answer is no. He would have lost, unlike Trump, because he would have had trouble getting out that Trump base. He would have not made those overtures to new constituencies that voted for Trump because of his celebrity status and his detoxification and his personality and charisma. And he is not a good politician, national politician. So those are my answers for that. Let's go with Gillis Enjoyer. Gillis Enjoyer asks, Scott is one of the people who... All right, Gillis Enjoyer. Let's not make our questions too long here. Even though he's complimenting me, we like short, succinct questions. But it's okay if you got a lot to explain, but... we prefer short and sweet. He thanked me for the 2020 Riots IQ supplement. Let me thank you for coming through and also added it was probably one of your best works. Yeah, thank you. You talked at the end of the pod about how bad things were in 2020 in contrast to how good things are now with Trump's second victory. His question is, do you think the country had to experience the low point for the pendulum to swing back in our direction? If the riots never happened, do you think Trump wins, but then not enough people would have gotten radicalized for the movement to be as base and successful as it is now in 2025? I don't know if the riots had to happen. I think it's more the COVID lockdowns and how long they lasted, and then the pushback against it made the country just completely sick of wokeness. I don't know if it was quite that the riots themselves had to happen. It's more that just things had to go crazy. And the riots themselves, there was a delayed reaction to or backlash to them. You could even argue there was no real backlash to the riots because the backlash that we saw, I guess, began building up in 2021, a year after. Maybe you could say that January 6th started it, but January 6th was ostensibly about the election, and then secondary about the COVID lockdowns, and then third about how no one did anything about the riots. So it was a distant third. So I don't know if it really had to happen. Because there was still, the country was continuing to experience this low point for at least another year or 2 years. The last time that they were able to engineer mass psychosis was with the Ukraine war, where all these people who can't locate Ukraine on a map become deeply concerned with it just because CNN tells them to be deeply concerned with it. So we have like Ukraine flags in the middle of nowhere of Alabama. So that was one of the last times you saw of like that the powers that be could whip up this type of hysteria in their favor. And then it's been, receding since then. I don't know if we had to experience it then, but I think it's important. But I think as the white pill, we can say we needed to experience it. We needed to experience an extreme low point so we could go back to the top, because people really needed to be sick of this stuff. You really needed to rub people's face in it before they just said, I'm tired of this. I want to go in a different direction for this country. And I think after several years of this country just having their face rubbed in it, they were done with it, and that allowed for Trump to be president. I think, and within that question, it's better that Trump was not the president, or did not get the second term in 2021, and had to wait 4 years to return to the presidency, because that presidency, the second term, it would have been better than the first term, but he would still been a weaker president. It would be a continuation of a lot of the things we saw from the first term. And there had still been all this COVID hysteria. They've been all still trying to impeach him. Republicans wouldn't have been fully on board with him. They had all been trying to figure out how we're going to have a post-Trump dynamic. It was the real thing that I think the low point is we had to experience the backlash of January 6th and Trump being cast out for us to have a much better Trump in 2025. I think if we had won that, true thing, it's better that Trump waited 4 years to gain the presidency than if he had just secured another term in 2020. That's the one thing I am certain of. With the riots themselves, for mythology, we can say we needed to experience it. I think we need to white pill ourselves. And so when we see things that, and to go off on what I was saying in last week's IQ supplement, which you all should listen to if you haven't yet, we had to experience this moment in order to gain what we have now. And for a lot of people who don't, people have short-term memory. They don't remember what the late 2010s were like. They certainly don't remember or even have any knowledge of what the pre-Trump era is like. Things are far better now than they were in the recent past. And I think maybe after years of just thinking everything is going wrong and seeing the most demoralizing shit imaginable, people can't let go of things. It's like, no, things cannot be going good. There has to be something bad happening. It's like, no. I mean, the political opportunities we have are completely unprecedented, and people should be a lot more optimistic and white-pilled. That's my thought process on this. And my answers to that question. So just to conclude, I think it's more that Trump had to have that moment of not gaining a second term and all this, a second impeachment, all these criminal investigations against him, all these attacks, and then he was able to build himself up and to be a much better president for 2025. That would be my answer to that. I don't know about the riots, but it's fine for us to say that we had to experience it just to explain that horrible moment in American history. And as I argued in the IQ Summit, I can't think of a lower point in American history than the George Floyd revolution of the summer of 2020. Second question is a follow-up to the first one. When you talk about the pendulum swinging between left and right, do you think there of these as just forces of history beyond our control? For example, George Floyd just happened to have counterfeit money that particular day while lockdowns were still on, and it leading to the lowest point in American history. That's a pretty crazy coincidence, with the counter-revolution not really starting until late 2023 with the detoxification of Trump happening. So a lot of these things are things I just said. So to his question, are we mostly just along for the ride of history, or do you think these events are also driven by conscious decisions made by certain individuals or groups too? A lot of it is just fate of history, our social trends and forces that it's hard to control. Another random thing that happened, that this is a combination of one decision by a certain person and then it having these results that were probably not intended. Elon Musk, for all our criticism of him and, the problems with him. I mean, my main criticism of him is that he's just not funny. He tries really hard to be funny. That's a minor thing. He's still a benefit for us. And him buying buying Twitter and then turning into X was one of the fundamental changes that helped the right over the last 5 years. Without that event, Trump would have not won the presidency in 2024. the right would not be as popular as it is now. We would not have this control over the conservative movement and this influence of the Trump administration without that decision. Because X, even though people say, well, it's, there's still plenty of leftists on there, it is still primarily a right-wing vehicle. I know that there's still leftist opinions, but this is no way like how it was in the late 2010s, where all the most viral content was libtards, and you had to be worried about libtards ratioing you and dunking on you. Now, libtards are the ones being ratioed and dunked on, and that's why they've all retreated to Blue Sky. The most popular content is far right content, and that is having an effect on the public. I think some people overstate the effect on the public, and there's also problems with the new X with the endless deluge of slop and other things, but it's still a benefit to the right. But that is a decision made by one individual that has had these results. And if you had not had that decision, you would not have the results. So it's a mix of both. It is these social forces and historical tide that we can't really control. There are some events that happen around the world that may shape people. I mean, let's look at COVID. This one event then upended our life for 2 years, 2 or 3 years, depending on how you want, from early 2020 to, the spring of 2022. And, just these one events that, are beyond our control can just offset things. But there's still individual decisions that can be taken that define history. I mean, Trump decided to run for president. No one expected that. That wasn't what the forces of history were seeming to build up for. It was either going to be between, conservatarianism versus Hillary Clinton. Instead, we got Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Elon choosing to buy X. That also shaped history. So sometimes it can be individual decisions that do things that we weren't thought possible. But then they have to happen at the right moment. Because if Trump had Trump had taken the escalator ride down in 2011, I don't think he wouldn't have won the presidency. He would have not been the presidential candidate, and he would have never run for the presidency ever again. But the fact is he chose the right moment in history for him. And so you have to and it's even the same with Elon. I think if Elon had bought Twitter in 2020, he would have been much more hemmed in and harassed by the government and his engineers into keeping it a left-wing platform. But the fact that he had bought it after people had had enough of COVID, were starting to turn against wokeness, it allowed him to turn it into this primarily right-wing vehicle that has spread our ideas to the country and is now having tremendous political influence. So that would be my answer. Individual decisions can shape history, but they have to have at the right moment. If they happen at the wrong moment, you're not going to have that impact on history. So that's a good question. Let's see who else we've got. Not unpronounceable once is saved for the mailbag, so we'll save that. We'll go with Maverick. Maverick's got funny questions to say. He said, what do you think is in store for Matt Gaetz in the future? So far, since resigning from Congress, his most notable contributions have been congratulating Ashley St. Clair on her baby's great genetics and defending Clinton Greenwald. I think Matt Gaetz is fine. Most of what he does on One American News is fine. A lot of these guys are going to have cringe moments and silly moments that you're going to be like, oh, why are you doing that? But he's mostly our guy. If you look at his program, he's mostly promoting a strong right-wing message. I think he's fine. I don't know what is in his future. I still think that maybe he could be welcomed into the Trump administration, but not for a Senate confirmable role. And he could go from there. I don't think Matt Gaetz still has a political future, but what political future that is, I don't know. Because he's very charismatic. He's a great political communicator. He still has a degree of status within the MAGA movement and on the right. And I don't think once his controversy subside and people start forgetting about them, he can move on into a bigger position. I think that with some of the maybe hopes he had of running for statewide office in Florida, that might be gone. And maybe even leveraging that into a presidential run is gone. But he still has a political future ahead of him. And he will still be pushing a mostly strong right-wing message. Of course, there's still going to be silliness involved with it. There was silliness involved when he was a congressman. He was a big promoter of legal weed. Obviously, we're not going to agree with that. Most lawmakers and people like this, we're not going to agree with 100%. But as long as they're promoting a 90% solid message, that's fine. And I still like Matt Gaetz. And that is, I think he's not finished yet. Even with the Ashley St. Clair, congratulations. We had a similar question. I guess I was wondering if anyone was going to ask about Glenn Greenwald, but New England refugee did. He said, "Who do you think is behind the release of the Glenn Greenwald video?" His statement is below. For those who might not know what the Glenn Greenwald video is, I am not going to discuss that contents of it, but I'm pretty sure you can Google on his own. Let's just say he was doing something very gay. And some people are going to ask about it. I mean, I don't really want to wade into the discourse. My only thoughts is, he's gay. What do you expect? You don't need to defend him. You don't need to, rush to his defense or anything. But it's like, he's gay. What do you expect? They're all doing this stuff. Take that how you wish to interpret it. But it is. I do see some conservatives who are even mainstream conservatives who are really mad about this, primarily for his views on Israel and his foreign policy views, and they're deciding to attack him, and they're like, this is immoral. But then they're all still friends with Dave Rubin. What the hell do you think Dave Rubin is doing? Dave Rubin is doing the same stuff. So is all these other guys that are gay they align with. What do you think Andy Ngo is doing? What do you think a lot of these closet cases that are major conservative influencers doing when their wife isn't around? They're all doing sick shit like this. So he's gay. What do you expect? That is my opinion on Glenn Greenwald. But who is behind it? From what I've been hearing is that he had like some type of hack, and that they were potentially trying to demand some type of payout, and so they found these videos. Why he retweeted it is, I think he had a boomer moment because he was maybe trying to find these videos. And then he found it, and maybe he was trying to hit bookmark, and instead he hit retweet. I think the retweet was an accident. That's the only explanation I can think of. I don't know why. So I don't think he wanted people to watch it. So that's it. I don't have anything else besides that. But who's behind it? He lives in Brazil. There's a lot of weird people and criminals who are trying to hack, major personalities and find type of stuff and get payouts for this. So given that, it could have been, Israeli intelligence maybe, is that, there has been attempts, hacking attempts and other things, weird things coming from Israel. This was even against European activists. There was something against Ava Vlardingerbroek, which I'm probably not even getting to pronounce her name right, where, I'm actually going to with this, is that there was some strange hacking attempt against her, and it had an Israel result or Israeli source for it. So they are involved in this type of thing. So who knows is behind it, but I think it was some type of hack, and that him retweeting it was an accident, and the rest is the discourse. But that is all I'm going to say on the Greenwald. It could not be political. It could just be guys, some random hackers who are wanting money or some sort, or it could be something in Israeli intelligence. Could be maybe somebody involved in the Brazilian government who has an axe to grind with Glenn Greenwald. Who knows? Could be this, like maybe even the gay prostitute himself. So who knows? But I think that's what I've been told or been hearing about it. He has a second question. New England refugee. He says, "Do you think the average person understands that miscegenation can lead to hugely different health outcomes?" This poor girl who it's talking about, a Indian Korean mixed girl who's having trouble finding a bone marrow bone marrow donor. This poor girl has no donor because this has never been her DNA. There has never been a DNA mix before, or at least very few Indian Koreans. No, the average person does not have any idea of the hugely different health outcomes. The average person thinks people are people, there's no real differences, and it's racist to think otherwise, and that's why there is almost 95% support for interracial marriage or interracial dating. So no, the average person absolutely has no idea about this stuff. I mean, how would they? The mainstream media doesn't report about this stuff. And all the information they get about it is like, there is no biological basis for racial differences. Don't worry about sickle cell anemia and other things. It's just like there's no differences whatsoever. So the average person is not aware of this whatsoever. And I think if you did make people aware of this stuff, they would have different attitude towards this. But, we're going to have to change how our education and media landscape in order to make people aware of this. But yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely not. Only people online, only online right-wingers are probably aware of any of these, and certain scientists who actually research this stuff. But they're being told to no longer publicize their findings because of actually I did mention this, but one of the long-lasting effects of the George Floyd revolution is it has made scientific research far more cucked, and especially dealing with medical research that interacts with racial differences. Now they're all supposed to ignore what they find, and because it's racist to acknowledge this stuff. Now we're going to go to K-Max. For some reason he said these are both for mailbag, but I don't know why he said these for mailbag, because he didn't say any normal questions or regular questions, but we'll answer it. He says, in a country music discussion, a weird thing happened at the American Music Awards. Megan Maroney presented an award next to Shabuzi, who's a black rapper who had a big country hit last year. The controversy happened when Maroney said the legendary Carter family, who basically invented country music. Shabuzi made an odd face as if to say everyone knows country music was invented by blacks. Is this another black rewriting of history, or what is your knowledge of country music's origin? No, they try to say that blacks invented everything. So Shabuzi likes to say that. I don't know if it's... She's just simply saying something. I mean, Carter family was hugely important to country music's development. And no one's going to say, like... If someone said Africa Bambaataa basically invented rap music, there's not going to be any like, well, actually, let me tell you about the roots of rap music. No one's going to go off on that like that. They know what they're saying. But if you don't acknowledge the black creation of all forms of American music, you are shunned. And it's the same, like with rock and roll, you have to say that blacks invented that, on their own. Jazz, blues, even though blues took a lot of influence from the music they were hearing from Anglo-Celts, it was brought straight over from Africa with no European influence whatsoever, no European interaction. They apparently also, completely invented the guitar. Europeans had never even known this instrument before, but they always say this stuff. And so it's the same with country music. Country music's ultimate roots are in Anglo-Celtic folk music. There are some influences taken from blues or some black spirituals they were hearing, but the ultimate form of it is European derived. And the artists who pioneered it, who made country music a genre in the early 20th century, were all white. It were people like the Carter family. So but this is like the same with all art forms. They just have to say it. So it's not surprised that Shabuzi would make that face. But it is funny that of it. He went to Grok. You shouldn't go to Grok, which Grok says it's a blend of African American, European, Mexican, and Hawaiian influences. The Mexican or the Hawaiian influences is And Mexican influences are very subtle in some of the instruments they use. But and so Grok says African Americans contributed significantly, introducing the banjo and shaping early recordings with blues and spirituals. But the core of it, as I said, comes from Anglo-Celt folk music. Same with blues. They just try to take over they try to claim all white cultural creations are theirs themselves. It is not multicultural roots. It's mostly Anglo-Celtic roots. And it's the folk music of Anglo-Celts themselves. So, not surprising he would have that reaction. Bigger problem is that it was all these black influence artists and others who are sweeping country music categories. Even though Post Malone is a white guy, he built up his career in rap, but those were the people winning all the country music awards. Anyway, second question. On Fox News, Tommy Lauren, speaking to Laura Ingraham, said the following: Gen Z rebrands laziness as stay-at-home sons, just like they did with quiet quitting. But let's be honest, the real crisis is the feminization of men. Young women want families. Too many young men want DoorDash and mama's basement. I do not see how woke is defeated when even the Fox News channel 100% blames men for any relationships today. We always have to proofread our questions before submitting them. Is the truth that even Fox News is still feminist? The irony, of course, is Tommy Lauren and Laura Ingraham both have 0 kids and claim young women want to have kids and families. Does any data back this? Well, Laura Ingraham has adopted children, but she doesn't have any biological kids. I don't think Tommy Lauren is even married. So Tommy Lauren's around my age, like a year or 2 years younger. But no, that's also the funny thing, is that they are not... they themselves didn't find good men. And maybe that's at fault for them. The thing about it is that conservative movement is built on simpery, on simping. I've always been saying this for a while for my articles, is that there's more young women involved in this stuff, and they are absolutely, oh my God, these women are so right, and they just can't find a good man, and this must be men's fault. And so a lot of this stuff is built on simping, and they cannot stop it. And all these women that they promote are these very aggressive girl bosses that they're like, I want a trad man who's in charge, but in fact, they're complete dictators of their home when they're there. I mean, it's like Laura Ingraham, based on her relationship stories in the past, she was a complete psycho. And if any guy was unfortunate enough to marry her, she would have been the complete dictator. And despite all their talk about traditional family roles and traditional gender roles, this is how it works for a lot of these women. And so the conservative men who think, take a liking to these women, and they think them as surrogate daughters, always believe all their bullshit, and so they still simp for them. And then they elevate them to being influencers, and when they're influencers, they always promote these types of lines. So it just what it is. But it is funny that it's Tommy Lauren and Laura Ingraham saying this. But is any data back this? I mean, I think by nature, women are more inclined to marriage and wanting a family. I mean, with men, traditionally, it's like the woman had to, be this, convince a man to settle down and take care of them rather than just trying to impregnate all the women around them and running around, whatever. So they had to, there were social pressures on men to marry rather than the women. Well, with women today, traditionally it was more the women that were more eager to marry, and the men just like, oh, well, I guess I'll do this. Today, I think it's much more equal in these aspirations. And generally what the data is showing, that there's more women who are less eager for a relationship, and I've done articles about this, and are more fine with not having a boyfriend, while more men are seeking a relationship in their dating life. I mean, maybe that may not pair out in actual experiences, but there are more women who are fine with utilizing their 20s when they're at the best time to be finding a mate, and they'll just like, I'm not settling down in this moment. So it's not the picture that Tommy Lauren and Laura Ingraham have. the vast majority of women are not wanting to be trad homemakers and waiting. Are not trad homemakers and waiting. They are have much of the same mindset as men. They would maybe want a more committed, monogamous relationship than men, or at least the high status men, but they are not as totally eager as like, I want a wife and kid, or I want a husband and kids now. They're thinking, once again, they think that conservative ink women are typical of all these women, but they can't find good men. They're too busy playing video games, which is just not true. The women the women are just as much to blame as the men are for this, if not more so. But it's always blamed on men because generally, and this finds a message with Tommy Lauren and Laura Ingraham due to their own past relationship problems, that they have a bone to pick with the men that they've dated, and they're willing to get into this anti-man feminist browbeating that they just can't give up on. They're almost addicted to. So, yeah, I think it's total bullshit, though. It's total bullshit for the same. I think women are more eager for monogamous relationships than men are, or at least the men they want to date are. But they're all not like at 23, like, I'm so eager to have kids and have a husband and have a family. That's a fantasy. That's a fantasy derived from a lot of these conservative ink women. And a lot of these conservative ink women want to lean in and still have that job while being a traditional homemaker or whatever, which doesn't quite work out all the time. So we are now going to end on LK Rurik. If I did not get to your questions, harass me and I will answer them for the mailbag. We are, of course, saving up a unpronounceable for the mailbag, so we will keep up for that. So now we'll conclude with the man formerly known as Mishaus, but now is known as LK Rurik. He's got 2 questions for today for the normal episode. He says, why are Republicans still so insistent on getting the black vote via rapper pardons as a recent but not exclusive example? This seems almost passé. America is not a biracial country anymore. You can be a pickier about whose interests you cater to. Blacks still have a tremendous amount of cultural cachet, more than any other ethnic group, even more than whites. I mean, it's even going back to that country music conversation, we still need to claim blacks invented all our culture. There's still these lingering aspects of like, we need the approval of blacks to be considered cool. Even though the predominance of blackness that was a part of peak wokeness is in recession. I mean, look at the negative response to Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance. It was like, a sign of peak blackness jumping the shark. It's like America's like, what the hell is this? Nobody in America thought this was cool. They just thought this was weird. So there's still that, but they still have a high degree of cultural cachet, and giving rapper pardons and other things is like seen as a way to be cool. And Republicans are still pursuing this. I think most Republicans are giving up on the idea of doing a ton of black outreach like they were doing in the 2010s, and just like, oh, if we increase it from 10 to 15%, we'll win all these elections. They figured out that they don't have to be total slaves to, black outreach to actually get the black votes. They just have to be, Trump. They just have to be like an alpha male, and they'll get enough of black male vote. But really what's more important is winning Hispanic and Asian vote. I think over time, a lot of this stuff will, not be as prevalent, but also blacks act as an interest block much more solidly than any other ethnic group. And that's why they have so much control of the Democratic Party. And that's why they're alienating other minorities who are tired of blackness and black worship, and that they are considering voting for the Republicans. So, they still aren't into it. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the rapper pardons, but it is what it is. I'm more upset with the Tory Lanez I'm not even sure that's how he properly pronounced his name, obsession that Anna Paulina Luna has, which we will be discussing in in my article tomorrow. But if it's just like a handful of rapper pardons and that's it, and we're not pursuing criminal justice reform, because all these, black outlets and liberals were complaining that, well, they're freeing rappers, but they're coming down harder on black criminals. It's like, well, you know what? I'll take that. I'll take that deal. And so as long as we're not trying to do extreme criminal justice reform, as long as we're ending DOJ investigations of these police departments over allegations of racism, which they're doing, it is what it is. It's cringe, it's stupid, but whatever. He has a second question. Lots of deserved negativity to the worst posters on the show recently, but I think it's time to tell us, who would you consider the best posters? He's got a few recommendations of Howling Mutant, Paul Scalise, Boochie Booch. I don't even know who that is. Feel free to voice any disagreements. Paul Scalise. I don't know. I like Scalise. I like the ones who are not just full-on propaganda. My favorite posters are just a few anons. Like, I really like Peter Nemitz because he's an original poster. He's not just simply posting whatever to fit in with a group chat or whatever, which a lot of these posters, it's fine that they're all propagandists and whatever, but it gets tiring looking at the same content over and over. And especially when they do these like 8-paragraph essays. Man, dude, just do no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs. Like, everyone does this. Or they do long threads. Come on, man. I like Howling Mutiny. He's really funny. Paul Scalise is interesting. I can't agree with all of his takes, but he does highlight a lot of my cultural and social observations, especially about the South or the malls or anything like that. So I do appreciate Paul Scalise. But Nemitz, that's a controversial one. I can't agree with all of Nemitz's takes, but Nemitz is a genuine poster. He just posts what he thinks. Sometimes that's wrong. He was way too black-pilled about Trump in the election, and he also was too much of a vax enthusiast. But most of the time, I find him insightful. Anytime I see his post, I think that's interesting and original, and that's really what I try to see. I really like Irkutanian, but he's gone. As a poster, he may be out there as a private account, but I can't reveal it. He's a great poster. RIP to him. But there's fewer people like that. There's fewer people like Nemitz. I think that's one thing that's been lost, is that there is not as many original and insightful accounts just giving their straight opinion rather than trying to propagandize people or trying to adhere to whatever random group chat party line there is, and that makes it not as good. I try to follow just more of the news now. I'm trying to think of some other people that are good. But I would agree with Howling Mutant, Scalise, but he's hit or miss. I think I like his interesting observations. Even though he copies from a lot of people, he does just post what he thinks. A lot of people don't do that anymore. It's like when I post whatever I think, I get people really mad. So you almost have to worry. You have to cater a little bit too much to the audience at times. So yeah, I would have to think about that. Even though I'm very pro X in the way it is now, there aren't as many good and original, insightful posters as there were 4 years ago. It is what it is. Like, I like Carlsbad a lot. I mean, it's a lot of these guys who are guests on my show. I really like Carlsbad, even though Carlsbad would sometimes get a little too obsessed with things. He was a good poster. He was an original poster, insightful poster. And that's always what I wanted to look for. But there's not as many people like that now as there were 3 or 4 years ago. There's a lot more funnier posters, though. I think some of the comedy posters are just straight off the wall stuff. There's a lot more people with, and there's some really funny memes and content going on. But I think it's more of just it's operating less as individual personalities and more as I'm not using this negative, but I can't think of a better image, but more of a blob where everyone's there and operating and together and expressing their opinions. But a lot of times it's more trying to operate in a party line and less people giving their own opinions. I mean, Fisher King, I think you mentioned him. He does give some of his thoughts, but sometimes his thoughts are a little. I think he's mostly good, but he sometimes they're a head scratcher. I can't condemn him, but people also get mad at him on his things. So, but that would be my answer to that, and that would be the end of our episode today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We're going to have great content for the rest of the week. It'll be on our normal schedule. So article tomorrow, mailbag Wednesday, article Thursday, and IQ supplement Friday. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.